Hi, Dr. David. Can
Hey,
you
Trish.
hear? Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay.
Yep. So, hi everybody. I'm Dr. David, grateful recovering addict and alcoholic, and also a therapist and a vice president of clinical programs here at Seeking Integrity. And this is our weekly webinar for addiction Q&A. As Tammy mentioned, I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes or so about a topic, and then you can ask questions about that or about anything you want related to addiction. And we'll try to provide you some answers. And there's always a really pretty good discussion these days. So what has been popping up for me into a brief little topic, I've had an awful lot of inquiries about dopamine and kind of what it is, what it isn't, and how do we restore it, and that kind of stuff. So I thought I'd just run on quickly, probably a review for some people, but I wanted to just kind of give a quick shout out to dopamine tonight, because dopamine is really at the heart of all addictions. And it's particularly at the heart of the addictions we treat at Seeking Integrity, the intensity addiction, sex addiction, porn addiction, and co-occurring drugs and sex. Those really are the ones that really do release dopamine to a great extent. And dopamine is really what kind of gives us that initial kick from our addictive behaviors, but it also is the troublesome secret in the sauce here for addiction. So what is it? Dopamine is one of the many neurotransmitters, norepinephrine, serotonin. There's a bunch of them that work in the brain, because our brain is not literally hardwired. The brain, each little cell in the brain talks to the next cell by jumping. A little chemical messenger jumps across the little gap between the cells. And when dopamine is one of those neurotransmitters that's released, it has a particular effect of heightening our mood. And we start to feel good, and we start to want more. And the first time we experience a dopamine hit from something, and we have all kinds of things that do that in our lives, being loved, getting a hug, eating good food, having sex, all those things give us dopamine. And when we first experience that, it's like, wow, that was good. I want to do that again. And that's the whole point of dopamine. It's literally designed in our brains to give us this understanding, or motivation, if you will, to do things that help us survive as a species. And so it's a kind of a beautiful system that addiction comes in and totally hijacks. And it hijacks it by sort of upping the ante, creating these super stimulation that becomes sort of the necessary baseline for us to feel anything. And porn is amazing at that. Co-occurring drug use and sex does that really well. Sex addiction does that really well. And gradually, in fact, not so gradually, fairly quickly, with these addictions, we can reset that level of stimulation to such a high level that normal stuff, like our favorite foods we used to like, or our favorite songs, or even having sex with our partners, doesn't do it anymore. It has to be that addictive kind of nature. So that's the problem here with dopamine. And really what dopamine does, a lot of people feel dopamine is about the reward of the feel good, but really dopamine is about the anticipation of it. And so what we're really addicted to with a lot of these addictions is the anticipation. And so that's why we'll see somebody who's using porn get online, and suddenly it's 6 hours later, and they've kind of lost that time. They've been in that trance going through, but it's always about the next image, the next image, the next image. And in many cases, for sex addicts and porn addicts, an orgasm is actually kind of something to be delayed or deferred, because it kind of ends the party, if you will. That's the nature of dopamine. What are natural rewards? I mentioned some: food, positive social interactions, collaborating, orgasm, and all that. So what are the unnatural rewards? Obviously, we start to look at cocaine, which gives almost twice as much dopamine as an orgasm. Nicotine actually has a more dopamine release than an orgasm. Methamphetamine, of course, is the granddaddy. It's like 13 times the amount. It's just this huge amount of dopamine that's flooding into the system. So those are the problems. So what happens? We get that anticipation. We get our bodies kind of get used to this level of stimulation, so that one of the problems when we get into recovery is that suddenly, until our brains kind of come back down to earth, nothing seems much so pleasurable. Things that used to give us pleasure is kind of dull and boring, and even sex with our partners may seem less than exciting, if we can even do it, because it's just not the same as that intensity. And that's something that really people have to grieve, let go of, and get adjusted to it. And that really also comes with another phenomenon universal to addiction called tolerance. And tolerance simply means that as our our bodies and brains are these kind of beautiful mechanisms that can adapt. And so we're throwing all this stimulation at it with methamphetamine or porn or sex addiction, and our brains compensate. They say, wow, this is an awful lot of volume coming in. Let's turn down the volume. And it does that by starting to shed dopamine receptors. It actually has ways to kind of turn down the volume so it's not being assaulted by all the stimulation. The problem is once we get into recovery, the volume turns off and there's nothing coming in. And our brains are used to this feeling of high stimulation. So in the initial stages of recovery, people can feel kind of depressed or a lack of joy about anything because of this brain thing that's going on. So that tolerance. So real quickly then, people often ask, well, how do we restore dopamine levels? What do we do? What can we do? And this is one of the great mysteries. There's been an awful lot of research that has gone into different chemicals and different infusions and things like that that can maybe speed up the repair of that dopamine. And I'll give you an idea. We've studied this extensively for meth users. That destruction of those dopamine systems in a meth user can take up to 24 months to completely recover. That's a long time. Most sex and porn addicts are going to be, in a matter of months, they're going to be feeling normal again. But everybody wants to restore those as quickly as possible, obviously. So how do we do that? Basically diet and lifestyle. So diet, high protein diets, low fat diets. There's even talk of fava beans, and this is just anecdotal, but fava beans have a lot of L-Dopa, which is a chemical building block that's useful in rebuilding this reward system. The other thing, diet and lifestyle, exercise, right? Exercise is the single biggest thing we know that can speed up the healing, because one of the kind of biochemical byproducts of exercise are the little building blocks for these reward pathways. And so exercise is a good thing. I always say that because I'm talking to addicts, and we can take everything and beat it into the ground, right? We can overdo it. And that's the risk there. We need to really do that in moderation too, because we've had people, hurt their joints and stuff from exercising too much. Other things to help restore the dopamine: adequate sleep, which is, I know in my first 2 years of recovery, I swear I didn't sleep at all. And my sponsor kept saying, nobody ever died of lack of sleep. And I just wanted to smack him senseless. But I didn't die, and I probably slept more than I thought I did. But anyway, sleep is important if you can do it. Listening to music. What we're trying to do is activate our brains in different ways. Music is a wonderful way. It's a whole different sense. It gets in there and helps our brains kind of heal in a way that's really constructive. And then the other two that I mention all the time: meditation, if you can do it. And we have a kind of an unrealistic expectation of meditation sometimes. For me, and I meditate regularly, if I can go 10 or 15 minutes with a really good solid meditation, that's a lot. When I first started, it was 2 or 3 minutes of focus, and that's just normal. But so what I try to do almost always instead is mindfulness. And by mindfulness, I mean simply being aware, being in my body, being in this moment, experiencing what I'm feeling. On the East Coast, I just had dinner. I feel good and content, and I'm aware that the sun is setting here, and it's a pretty evening, and that kind of thing. I'm not thinking about, my God, tomorrow I have 18 appointments. What am I going to do? How am I going to get there? What am I going to wear? What should I pack for lunch? Stuff like that. Or regretting the past. Boy, what a jerk that person was. I wish I would have said X, Y, Z to him. All that stuff that pulls us in both directions out of the here and now. So that is a really, I think, kind of the best. This diet and lifestyle are probably the best things we can do for ourselves in recovery. And sleep, if you can get it, and that mindfulness is huge. Mindfulness, by the way, and I'll close on this, mindfulness has been shown to really change the way the brain is wired. It can really change and heal us, even from trauma and things like that. So it's good stuff. So as I said, you can talk about that. You can talk a question about anything you'd like. And I'm here with my co-pilot, Tammy, and we're going to have some fun.
Well, I was thinking fava beans, and I thought, well, if I run literally to the store and buy fava beans, I can help heal my dopamine. But that's my little addict brain going, the more is better. So, but you know, it is really interesting. One of the things I have to say that I learned early in recovery was exercise, and I've continued with that. And you know, even in these uncertain, kind of crazy times, it's been the one thing that I can consistently do, and it's self-care, and I'm committed to it. I mean, I make sure that I do that in a healthy way to take care of myself. But and I can't go fast enough to get the big old dopamine rush. But just you know, I get enough feel good stuff that I, you know, and you know, in the sense of accomplishment and things too. I am terrible at meditation. Like even with guided meditation, I don't do well with that, but I love mindfulness. And there are so many apps now about, you know, mindfulness and guided, because gosh, I sure needed that, you know, in order to, you know, clueless, you know, but to have the mindfulness. But I think like you're talking about too, the intentionality of, you know, where's my breathing? Where's, you know, where is my body? Where am I in the now? And, you know, I too look out, you know, even when I'm running, I'm looking out at, you know, I live in the desert. I look out at the desert and, you know, appreciate things, you know, rather than having my mind, you know, spinning. But as an addict, balance is one of the things I've always struggled with. And, you know, even in recovery. So finding, you know, I'm still not great, but gosh, I'm more in this zone than the woo up and downs. And the more I've been able to live in that, you know, that's a really good place for me. And I feel the benefits of it, you know, for myself as well. So.
Can I share, just because you're not normally here, Tammy, a little personal thing about exercise and you and
Yes.
me? And I really do admire you, because you get up and run. And when I've had the chance to be in the same time zone as you and working together, but
He heard me. I was on the balcony and he's like, what is that
I
noise? I
was
was
going to
doing
say,
burpees on the.
we at Signatory, this beautiful house that the clients stay in Encino, and the staff were there setting it up. We had to like do it really quickly, so we were all staying there too. And I was in the downstairs bedroom, and Tammy was upstairs, and it was like 4 o'clock in the morning, 4:30.
It was early. It was probably,
So
it was
I
early.
just boom, 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 boom.
There's an elephant above me.
The ceiling was going to crash in, and it was Tammy doing a burpee challenge, right? You were in a burpee
I
challenge.
was doing a burpee challenge on the balcony. I thought I was being kind and out because I'm outside and it'll be, I mean, I was intentional about choosing the location. I wasn't in the room. So, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was like, what? And I was like, oh, so yeah. Anyway, so we have questions.
Okay.
The first one is, I am a single gay man with sex and meth addictions. I am in recovery. I try my best to avoid triggers. That means not staying at a hotel alone, not masturbating, not having sex, avoiding gay bars, no bathhouses, no hookup apps, and not looking at attractive guys at the gym or even visiting the beach. Once I give up so many things, I get this sense of deprivation, and eventually I explode with meth and sex binge. How can this feeling of deprivation be handled or changed? Wow, I can relate to that.
You know, that is such a great question, because look at all the things you're doing, you know, and these are necessary things, I believe, for meth recovery especially. Just, you know, people, places, things, all those things that are associated with use. And so those are really choices you're making that are healthy for you and good. But I think it can be in the mindset of like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do this. And suddenly it does feel like this deprivation, as you say. So I would do a couple of things. I try to reframe it the best you can. So, you know, what are you doing for yourself, and what are the benefits of this? And maybe telling yourself, yeah, this is a sacrifice from what I would like to be doing, but I know it's, you know, for my greater good, or whatever kind of thing like that you can do. But also, you know, I think this is one of the huge essentials of recovery, is that recovery is not about just stopping doing something or not doing something or controlling the behavior, right? And we need to do more than just control our behavior. We need to create a new life that's satisfying and wonderful. And so I'd really try to also focus on, what can you do? What are you doing? How are you connecting? We know that social networks are so important. So what are you doing to connect with people? You know, there's 12-step groups, there's maybe other recovery groups, but maybe there's a softball team, or there's a choir, or, you know, I know these are kind of weird times right now, but there are places and opportunities to get together in different ways. And I think it's essential that we build those social networks. Keep your brain engaged in different ways. Learn a new language, or take up a musical instrument, or regain something. One of the great things, I had a client once who, in his youth, had played guitar, and he hadn't touched a guitar in years, but he picked up guitar in recovery, and it was amazing to see, because I think he made great progress because of all the different physical movements involved with your fingers, the parts of your brain that are activated by music, the concentration. I mean, there's all this. It was much more than just playing an instrument. It was all these sets of skills that he was employing to work on his own behalf. So I would, really try to fill your life with things you can do that are pleasurable and joyful. And also remember that that thing I was talking about, where our brains kind of have to readjust in recovery. There's a name for that. It's called anhedonia. It's this inability to experience pleasure. Everything's kind of gray, and we feel deprived, and kind of nothing's doing it for us. And there's a little bit of that too. And I think it's probably biochemical. I mean, some of that we just can't avoid. That gets better with time. But I think, it's the place we want to avoid is being a victim, and like, oh, look at everything I'm sacrificing. And remember that those sexual urges, when they do come up, and I know with meth, it's a very common pattern to have, a couple weeks, couple months of clean time, and then it pops up with sex. The sexual acting out, remember, is not about sex. It's not about being horny. It's about other things, like any sex addiction. It's about other feelings that need to be managed in some different way. So hang in there. It does get better. I guarantee it.
It does get better, but it really is a lot of reframing, and I still don't like being told what to do. And so for me, I absolutely had to frame it with, I'm choosing to do this for myself. And the benefit for me is, I mean, I really was very, very set in that, is I'm choosing to do that. And I still do. I had surgery a few years ago, and the doctor gave me my dog was on, a way stronger, same med, way stronger. And, and it took the very little edge off, but I was like, I lost my ability to manage those good drugs anymore, but I was great, in that same moment. I was like, okay, I'm in pain, but I'm also grateful because recovery has given me all these other things. But like you were mentioning, I got my therapist, I remember this, like this is a while ago, but my therapist in treatment said, if you don't make recovery fun, you aren't going to make it. So I made sure I made it fun. And I was very social. I connected with other people, because for me, addiction, even if I was in a crowd, I was alone. And so I needed to make those connections with people. I did a lot of stuff with other recovery people. And that was my tribe. It still is, but for the first couple of years, really, that was my social, connection. I was involved in I was young and single at the time, and we had a singles young people's group that, connected, and we did stuff before meetings, after meetings, social, lived in Michigan. We went cross country skiing. We did stuff, and that was so good for me, and to give me perspective that there is lots more to life than just the acting out, and I hear too and then I get, the feeling of deprivation, but then I'm in the shame of, oh God, I relapsed, I used again. And so, that cycle, to be able to go, today I'm choosing not to do that. I'm choosing it. And it, and I'm glad, I'm good, so that reframing really can help. So.
Right. Also, I just want to say, I assume you're going to meetings, but if you are, and I hope you are, make sure you stay for the fellowship afterwards. And that can even in the Zoom meetings, that happens, where they just kind of leave it open and people can share, because that's the important part. And that's the mistake I made at first, because I was really uncomfortable being in the meetings. I would dart in at the last minute when they started and be the first one out the door. And I was really missing a whole lot. And everything changed once I started hanging around. So make sure you connect with people in the rooms as well.
Yeah, I hung around right up from the get-go. I was like, and for me, I was a young female, and at that time, most of the meetings I went to, there were less females, in general. So it was uncomfortable. But like I said, then there's young people's group. Like even in the 12-step, there's so many different groups. You can find, the people you can hang with. And, I'm just going to give a plug to your In the Rooms group, because on Tuesday nights, David is hosting a chemsex group. It's one of the only places where you can go for both in one spot on intherooms.com. So that's Tuesday nights at what time?
8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific.
Yes. So join that. It's free. It's another place to, connect with other people. My experience with that is people, connect within the rooms and can find, sponsors and other people that, can socialize within a healthy recovery way as well. So
Exactly.
okay, next question. I hope I can say this right. Can dopamine deficiency and meth addiction be fixed with L-Tyrosine supplements?
Right. Yes, that's a really interesting question. And there's a lot of work being put into trying to figure out the answers to these things. Because of the difficult nature of this deficiency syndrome, there's a lot of work on it. There is some anecdotal evidence that L-tyrosine does help. That's been the basis of a lot of infusion therapies that are not approved, but kind of off-label, and people do to try to restore these things quickly. I would check with your doctor. My understanding is that it can't hurt, but I'm not a physician. So you want to make sure you check with these kind of supplements, because some of them are harmful or can interact, I should say, with things, especially like with HIV meds, they can interact in a negative way. So check with your doctor. But I think your best bet probably are the diet, exercise route, and then maybe looking at these supplements as a later alternative. I'd run it by your doctor and see. That's the best I can say for that.
Well, and my little addict brain is going, like it feels like I'm looking for something to fix things, the pill, the injection, the whatever to fix it. And, and some of it is just, it's going to take time, and doing the right thing today and doing the right thing again tomorrow.
Right. Yeah.
Which is just not really where we're like, that's not where we're wired to be. So, oh, this is good. How do I mourn the intense sex I used to have with meth? Are there are signs I am giving that up subconsciously, not just consciously?
Wow. Well, these questions are really...
They're great. I'm loving them.
So let me talk first about that grief process, because I think that's such an intense and important phase of recovery, not just for a meth addict, but for porn addicts, for sex addicts in general. Because and it really relates to the topic tonight, frankly, the dopamine, because what is dopamine about? Dopamine is about anticipation and desire. And what we are in love with in our addiction is the fantasy of stuff, right? If I'm sitting at home, if I'm a meth user and I'm about at home going on Grindr or something, looking to party and play, my mind, the fantasy is telling me about these fabulous times, all the best times, the hot times, the incredibly sexy, erotic times, but that's that euphoric recall, right? It's half the story, if that, and we forget the other parts of the reality of it. So, but I think even in recovery, we are in love with the fantasy of what it could be or might be, or could be next time. It's all that next time. And so I think letting that go is really huge. And and I always try to work with my clients to remind them they're not letting go of the reality, because the reality, if they talk about it, is, well, talk to somebody who's been up for 6 nights using meth and hasn't had water and, masturbating till they've injured themselves, and you get the idea. It's not really an erotic hot time, frankly. And so it's that fantasy, that it's the dopamine fooling us. And it's the great seducer. And so I think letting go of it is really important. But I think the best way to answer your question is to really focus in on the reality, to look at the consequences, look at the timeline. At Seeking Integrity, we do timelines with different drug use, sex things, important life events, moods, that kind of stuff, and really starting to look at how these things correspond and the reality of what it did to us, as opposed to these kind of fabulous hot times that we're being forced to give up. So I think grieving, it's like grieving anything else. And there's those 5 stages I already shared about Kubler-Ross. And I think it's important to mention that, they're legitimate stages, but the model makes it imply that they're linear. They're certainly not linear. You can be in denial one day and in acceptance the next day, then angry the next day. We're all over the place and we're grieving. And grieving, there's no one correct way to do it. But I think the thing is to be engaged in the process of letting go. And letting go what the meaning of it is, letting go of the urges and cravings. There's a couple different things we have, dimensions of that grief we have to follow through with. But I think the intensity is really important. It's a great question because it happens not just with meth users, but porn as well, sex addicts. I had a meeting with our clients earlier today, and we were talking about that people often think, what's going to be left? It's going to be kind of vanilla, boring sex or no sex, and just my life is over kind of stuff. And that's that kind of black and white either or thinking. I think we have to really put that on the table if we can, and just kind of work through and know that this passes. One of the great remedies too, if you can do it, is be around other people who are farther down the road than you are. And I think that's an amazing experience to hear people, with a year or 2 years or 10 years talking about recovery and what sex and intimacy looks like in their lives, and how that old kind of what they thought was this incredible fantasy that they had to give up, they don't even want. They're kind of disgusted by it now. And so you're a work in progress. But yeah, I think the recognition that you have to let it go is really important.
Yeah, I was thinking, the being really connected with somebody rather than the body parts and 6 days of being awake, and it's like you said, it's the intensity, but it's so hollow. It's there isn't much there. And I remember for myself in a very different way, but I was always chasing, I had a good time once. I'm always going to keep chasing that, even though the next, 20 times were like, oh, the walk of shame. I can't believe I'm doing this, that whole thing. But my brain forgot all about that because that one time it was really awesome or whatever. But
right.
I don't miss any of that. I'm so glad you're here. Keep coming back. But honestly, I'm so grateful for all the things that recovery has given me. And the most important thing is, first of all, my integrity and my ability to be honest and everything else. But with healthy connections to, the people that I care about, I can actually show up for them, and be in a relationship and not just be thinking, about myself. So I'm glad you're here.
Right.
Okay, next, go ahead.
I was going to say that what I hear clients, and these are mostly meth clients, say so often is that they were looking for connection, right? There's a loneliness that kind of is woven through this whole group. And I think to really looking for that connection. But ironically, what seems to be really intense connection feels that it's that hollow feeling you mentioned, Tammy. That's so true. It's just, you don't feel, it lets you down. It's not the real thing.
Yeah, and being alone in a crowd, being in a whole room, but also that thing that in my sane moments, if anybody really knew who I was, I could never show who I truly was, that whole facade. So it's so disconnected from being an authentic person, and
yeah.
This is much better. Okay. I'm going to the eye doctor soon, but right now it's reading classes on top of this. Okay, next question. Hi, I was more of a binge user, more like a couple weekends in a row, then stop for about 8 weeks and repeat. My use would last no more than 36 hours and then I would get tired. I've done this on and off for 20 years, but would go sometimes years without using meth. I've been 30 days sober, yay. I'm into bodybuilding and a lot of cardio and practice mindfulness. I eat right. How long should I expect dopamine levels to return to normal?
Great question. And I assume you're a meth user. It doesn't say, but that everything else.
Yeah, he said something.
That kind of pattern anyway, I think.
Yes.
So that's a pretty common pattern, as you probably know, with some weeks in between and then the binge.
It would go sometimes years without using meth.
Right. And congratulations on 30 days sober, which is amazing. And I really make sure you look at what you did for that time. You had the longer period up to a year, and see if you can replicate whatever was going on with you then to do that. I've had clients too who've been stuck in that kind of pattern for years and years. So good for you for taking the action. You're doing all the right stuff, eating right, mindfulness, cardio, and all that. So what we know about this, and in the United States, we don't have a lot of drug research, frankly, but the head of the National Center on Drug Abuse Dr. Nora Volkow is a meth researcher, so we happen to have a lot of great research on this. And what we know is that meth, the reward circuitry that's really destroyed by methamphetamine, and methamphetamine is by far the worst of anything. The maximum repair time is 24 months. But the pattern you've been talking about, and that's really, I think, for more chronic, everyday. So, you know, I would, and this is not scientific, maybe put that in half, a year. The other thing we know, and we know this from research that's been done on young men who are porn addicts and versus older men who are porn addicts, we know that the younger you are, the quicker you heal. And so, depending on your age, if you've been doing this for 20 years, I guess you're in your 40s or 50s or in that area, and so you're probably going to take a little bit longer than some. But I think you're so conscious about what you're doing. I think it should go quite fast. What does it look like, by the way? So there's this anhedonia I mentioned with kind of not feeling pleasure. There's other things too. There's a fuzziness in your thinking, not kind of being sharp. Sometimes there's an indecisiveness, there's an impulsivity. And this, I think, is one of the biggest risks for a meth user, is that your level of impulse control is really quite low. And so if a strong trigger comes along, it's really easy to pull you right off track. So, but I would, outside 2 years, given the pattern of use you're talking about, I don't think it's anywhere near that. And I think after probably several months of really clean, you're going to start to not quite feel much of anything different. It's going to be very subtle in terms of the signs. But yeah, I would just keep doing what you're doing.
Well, and I hear the eating right and exercising. I would love to know what you're doing to get support. I'm glad you're here, but what other support things, because that impulsivity that you talked about, the more you have a plan when you're not in that impulsive moment, the more likely you are to choose, according to the plan. So hopefully you've got connections for, doing recovery minded things. I'm going to give a plug. I've got 2 things to share with you. There is an online work group for sex and porn addiction. Scott has one going, it's just finishing up, and Jason's got one going, but another one will start August 2nd. And that Dr. David and Dr. Rob both, plug in and share during those. Those are 90-minute segments, but it's educational information. But one of the other things I wanted to talk about on this format in particular is Dr. David's going to be doing a chem-sex interactive lecture series that would be a companion to the other. You can do either or both, but that will be starting in early August, so watch for that. But that will be really focused on information and skills specifically about healing from co-occurring chemical and sex addiction. So hopefully, so watch for that on seekingintegrity.com. But you may find some of those resources particularly beneficial, as you're moving forward as well. So, okay, next question. I have been a chronic relapser of meth. Typically, I've gotten into trouble, or I have trouble getting to 4 months clean, no matter how many meetings, telephone calls, individual or group therapy I have. Is there a hump of 4 to 6 months in meth recovery? Does it get easier, after you get past that time frame?
Right, another great question. So there are these kind of vague benchmarks, I guess, in recovery. And, and for years, decades in 12-step program, 90 days have always been kind of special. And with a lot of addiction research, they've discovered that there is something important about 90 days in terms of brain recovery and body recovery related to addiction. So a lot of the stuff we kind of know as folk wisdom and 12-step program actually has some importance. 6 months is another important benchmark. And the trick with these kind of recoveries, whether it's porn or sex addiction or co-occurring, is to really move from a sprint to a marathon, right? From going from, everyday intense to learning how to go for a long period of time with these recovery activities, and not white knuckling at all, but kind of shifting gears a little bit and getting into it. So I think it's important to kind of get your routines really solid and working. It sounds like you've done a lot of good stuff with individual, group, phone calls and et cetera. Remember, connection is the key to this. The other thing I'll just say, where I've seen some people relapse over time, is that when they are not using drugs, but they're still occasionally, when they masturbate or when they're having sex, thinking about meth-related fantasy. And sometimes that's so, it's out of frustration because they can't have an orgasm because of that thing we talked about at the beginning, where dopamine's kind of hijacked that system and it hasn't kind of repaired itself yet. So I think that's one way people kind of keep it alive. They kind of play with it. So I'd really be super careful about that. You want to not let your brain go there during sex or during masturbation, and just make sure your connections are straight and keep it up. For reasons I just mentioned with the impulsivity and some of the unique features of meth, I think the recovery is hard. Relapse kind of is part of the game, but the key is to get back up quickly, not feel terrible. You don't want to give yourself permission to do it, but if you do it, it's don't shame yourself and just get back up and keep coming back. So I would just go through it. This is one of those things where if you go to meetings, I'd put this out, see what people say. And I think you get great advice and information and wisdom from what the experience of the people in the rooms is.
And I was curious as to what's happening in the 3 to 4 months. Is something changing during that time, for you? Do you alter your patterns at all? Are you going, oh, I'm getting better, so I'm going to less meetings, I'm calling less? I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. And Dr. David, you have talked before about smoking nicotine, and like that keeps the brain activated too. And like, I was kind of curious if something like that, in addition to, like you talked about the fantasies,
Right.
the meth fantasies, if something's, still keeping that, kind of going.
Yeah, thanks, Tammy. I meant to mention that before, but when I mentioned nicotine, it escaped me. So yeah, nicotine is a really powerful drug. I mentioned it has more dopamine than orgasm, and it's unfortunately one of the first drugs most of us get exposed to, and it's a pretty bad choice for that because it goes right into the heart of this reward circuitry and really teaches the brain how to be addicted. And we ask our clients to seek integrity not to be smokers, not to give up cigarettes, because we believe, our philosophy is that for recovery, if they've given up everything else, but they're still using nicotine, their brain is still like idling in a way. And the addiction is not kind of totally extinguished. It's still smoldering. And so I don't know if you're a smoker or not, but that clearly is a good idea to give that up if you can.
Okay, the next one. I'm a single gay man. I had a sex addiction before meth came into the picture 9 years ago. After having sex with over 6,000 men, I have a major novelty-seeking behavior. I get bored of cars, houses, cities, countries, and boyfriends. I find myself traveling to different countries, learning new languages, changing friends, and always looking for something new. Does this novelty-seeking behavior improve in recovery, or should I learn to live with it? I'm afraid I will never be able to be in a long-term relationship with the same person.
Wow. Okay. So we know that novelty is another feature of these kind of syndromes, right? Dopamine affects that, and with addiction, novelty is something that we strive for. That's what keeps a porn addict on their computer all night long, is looking for the next thing, something new, something different. And so this is kind of that dynamic expressed in every area of your life with things. Couple reactions to what you said. One, I don't know if you've ever been tested for ADHD, but what I see sometimes in great frequency in adult meth using clients is, with this kind of pattern, is adult ADHD. And it's this kind of inability to focus and kind of follow through and get bored easily. And so you might get that, do a screening if you haven't done that already. That might be one thing. The other thing, I think it'd be really important to, if you're not in therapy, maybe get some therapy to look at what's going on with all this stuff from the outside, to get a sense of being fixed or healed, right? It's always, all these things are outside: languages, cars, boyfriends, everything is out there. And in my experience, when I see that, it's this kind of desperate need to fill up something here. And honestly, the only way you're going to get that is from inside. And so whatever that takes for you, I think for me, that journey, and I had a similar one, not quite as extravagant, because I couldn't. I would have if I could have. But for me, it was always looking, kind of what Tammy mentioned before, always looking for something from the outside to fix that hole inside. And for me, it took a lot of, first of all, therapy, but a lot of just kind of work and grieving this person and validation and feeling worthy. Remember that one of the key core beliefs of a lot of addicts is that we just don't feel worthy of love, of success, sometimes of occupying space, or we're always kind of looking for something from the outside. So you might kind of look at those kind of issues in therapy, or with your sponsor, or with some reading. I assume you're a man, and you might want to read The Velvet Rage if you haven't read it already, about validation. And for gay men, it's a really, the model is universal about how we don't feel good about ourselves, of who we are on the inside. So we do all this stuff out here to get validation and feel good about ourselves. But we're still the same person inside, and we know this stuff doesn't really represent who we are, so it doesn't work. So anyway, that's The Velvet Rage by Alan Downs. It's a good book. There's many others too. And I just, for some reason, I want to say Brene Brown. I think you might want to look at Brene Brown and vulnerability in some of her work too.
Brene Brown comes up a lot. Kristen Snowden's webinar earlier today, we talked about Brene Brown and shame. So if you missed that one, it's recorded. It's been posted on the sexandrelationshiphealing.com site under resources. You'll see previously recorded. Lots of great content, here. So my thought was, all that stuff is trappings. That isn't, the stuff isn't who we really are. Who we really are is who we are on the inside. And I felt the hollow. I felt like this is all empty. I'm looking for all this stuff, and aren't I great, and all of this kind of stuff. So, and really, no offense, I really feel like this is just what I felt. And the underlying stuff, that's what we treat at Seeking Integrity Los Angeles. We have clients come from all over the world, and we're really looking at stopping the behavior, but really addressing those underlying issues, that are the cause of why we feel hollow and think that, lots of sex, lots of porn, lots of chemicals, lots of whatever, is going to fix that. So if you are interested, you can reach out to Tammy, T-A-M-I, at seekingintegrity.com. I'm happy to give you resources, whether it's a therapist or, tell you more about the treatment program. But gosh, when I hear consistently from the guys that, I see, I've had, the therapists that have referred to us that, talk about how different their clients are, that it's life-changing. And, it isn't all the, the crazy wild stuff, but it's meaningful work. So I'd invite you on that journey. Okay, next question. My husband has been strong in recovery for about 6 months. Yay. Discovery was about a year ago. He is taking all of the recommended steps to heal from his addiction and repair our relationship. I'm also doing the work in hopes of healing our relationship and recovering from the betrayal. The issue is I feel stuck. I don't feel love for or from my husband, even though I see all the positive changes and all the effort he has put into making amends and build trust. Logically, I know I love him, but I feel totally numb towards him, and it really scares me. Is this common? Yes. So.
Yeah, it is. And what a great question. Couple dynamics are just so complex. And when you've had the level of betrayal that occurs in sex addiction and the shock of discovery and all that follows, there's a lot of wounding that's occurred on both parties, but I think particularly of the partner. And so I think there's a lot of issues there. I'm really pleased to see he's doing all the work and that you're doing the work. And so I think I'm very hopeful about all that. It's a journey. I know that a lot of the folks that really sort of created some of the work around partners, talk about a 5-year schedule, which it sounds, disheartening, but it's a long period of recovery at different levels. And remember that intimacy, which is, I think, what you say you're not feeling, that really comes with vulnerability and trust. And I think when I hear you say you're numb, that tells me that you're disconnected from some feelings that you're probably going to have to connect with. And that may be anger, rage, sadness, hurt, all of those, I don't know. And you probably already had your fill of those feelings, I would imagine as well. But the numb piece is a clue that there's some feeling there that you don't want to disconnect, because numb is not a feeling. Numb is a distancing from something that's there that we're not seeing. And so I encourage you to maybe drill down into that a little bit. But remember the connection that I think you're missing really comes from vulnerability on both your parts, from trust. And also I think it's so important for couples not to just do and this is essential, of course, to do the hard healing work. It's painful sometimes, emotionally painful, it's physically painful, but you also want to have fun. Make sure you guys are out there doing something together that you like. I always talk about couples wanting to kind of rewrite their story, do something fun together where you both are doing it and involved in using a different part of your brain than this healing grind, you know what I mean? And so I think it's a matter of rebuilding your relationship in totally different ways. You are already relating to each other as different people. And I think there's also a kind of an analogy, I guess, they talk about big ships. You're going, if you want to change course, you just can't turn on a dime. You have to kind of slow down and stop and then pivot. And I think in many ways, relationships like that, you have to unlearn a lot of the kind of negative ways that we were relating to each other and then start building something different. And it takes time. So hang in there. You guys are both doing the work. I think it's amazing and wonderful. And I would ask for patience. And also I would make sure you check this stuff out with your peer group. The other partners that you're in touch with, run this by them and see what their experience has been. That's a huge teacher, I think, the experience of other people.
Yeah, and I was like, yay, he's 6 months. But from a partner standpoint, it's only 6 months. There's this whole period of all the betrayal and all the lies. And, we talk, on Dr. Rob's, we've talked about, it's 18 months to 2 years before trust is really rebuilt. So you're about 6 months, on that course. And yes, a longer term and everything. But at the end of the day, the reality is the person, so there's losses to grieve together. The person that you thought had your back and that would never betray you did. And so it's never going to be quite the same. But the learning to play together, in the Couples Healing from Betrayal workshop, one of the goals is learning to play together. That's right. Such an important piece. Grieving losses together, that's a really important piece. But the numb, there's grief there, and I'm sorry, it's going to be painful, and and you're doing your work, and that's great. Just understand there's still going to be hurt. I mean, even though you can see he's making progress, you can't trust it 100% because he did betray you before. So it's just a process, and to understand that you guys are doing great holding the space for the relationship, during this time. There are things to get unstuck. It may be, I'm going to have to feel sad, and I'm going to have to be angry and whatever. I'm angry that the marriage that I thought I had isn't, all of those things are real and challenging, but gosh, I too have so much hope for each of you and the relationship too.
Tammy, is there a webinar that could benefit from?
I think any of the couple stuff. So the Wednesday morning series, Eddie Caparucci is next week, and he really talks about, getting to the other side of the road. I think that one's really helpful. We are going to have the couples online series that's going to be coming up. That will be on seekingintegrity.com this week. We're almost there. By Friday, it should be on there. So, but reach out to me. I'm happy to share resources and do my best to point you in different directions. But like I said, lots of hope for you. But Troy Love, John Taylor does Rock and Relationships. It's practical. I don't do that one with him anymore. It changed times, and Scott does that one. But I loved it. It was like, these 4 things, and I was like, I can do those 4 things, and it was just like, just practical tools that can otherwise escape me. So
Great.
Okay, next question. After a period of complete sexual abstinence and early meth recovery, how do I include masturbation? Can you talk about mindful masturbation without porn?
Great question. So, you know, it's recommended that there's a period of time in early recovery when, and we do this with our clients too, we ask them not to masturbate, to not have sex, to have a period of abstinence. And there's no fixed rule. A lot of people use 90 days. Some people go shorter, some people go longer, but it sounds like you've done that period of sexual abstinence. So then what about masturbation? And I think masturbation can be, it's one of those things that can be in any circle, right? It can be an inner circle behavior, which just means I'm acting out, I'm in my disease. It can be a middle circle behavior, which means it's kind of maybe a slippery slope thing, or it can be an outer circle behavior. It's like life affirming. It's good for me. It's healthy. It's joyful. And so it moves around, right? So I think it's interesting to be clear on where it goes. It's like you're trying to incorporate it now in a very conscious way, which good for you. So I think what I would do is a couple of things. You want to set your intention. And I think if we find ourselves kind of drifting off into scripts, fantasy, disconnecting from ourselves, that's going in the wrong direction. What we want to do with masturbation, and sometimes described as mindful masturbation, is to stay connected with our thoughts and feelings and what's going on and where we're going and what's happening to our bodies and how it feels. And just in other words, we're very conscious and present for the sexual experience, and we're not disconnected in a way that really is more reminiscent of our sex addiction. And so the thing about it is that it's very easy to get pulled off track. And so you want to be really careful about it. You may want to set a timer, which I've had clients do, to limit the time. Just, you may want to make sure that, you ground yourself properly, you breathe, you call, you relax, you do whatever you need to take care of yourself. But I think it's just a matter of doing it very consciously, doing it very carefully, setting an intention. What do you want to get from the experience? It's just a way of staying connected with your body. The other thing to really be aware of is that it's so easy to, I mentioned earlier about going into some of those meth-related fantasies that are still up in our arousal template. They're always going to be there. And it's very easy to get into that stuff. So you want to be very mindful of that and not go there, because that's going to activate all that thing again. But, I would just do it consciously, and good for you for inquiring. I think it's great. Just be cautious.
Dr. Rob has used the term dating himself, dating yourself, and I was like, set a bath, make it a lovely event, and, but where you're very mindful and focused on the experience and not, the images that previously could have been there. So,
Right.
Okay, next question. I discovered my husband's addiction 10 months ago, and we've been separated since then. Recently, I was forced to file a report of sexual misconduct against him to the humanitarian organization that we both work for. It was really difficult to do, but I felt I had to do it out of ethical obligation and for my own professional survival. Had it been discovered that he had been paying for sex with one of our vulnerable women our organization serves, it would have been a scandal, and it would have been unfairly implicated in it. While he feels real remorse for having hurt me and put me in such a predicament, he also objects to the idea that what he constitutes is sexual exploitation. He doesn't see it as an issue with inherent power imbalance between him and the women he was paying for sex or transactional nature of it. He thinks because he was nice to the women and they were consenting sex workers, it isn't exploitation or misconduct. This has really disturbed me. He says he has been successfully in recovery for 6 months, and I'm genuinely happy for him. However, he continues to harbor such views, makes me question if his recovery is real. He thinks I am wrongly mischaracterizing all sex work as exploitation because of my own conservative values. Am I wrong to be questioning his commitment to recovery?
Wow. Okay. So a couple things in there. One of the, I think, hallmarks of addiction is that when we're in that zone, our judgment is extremely bad, and our awareness is bad, our insight is bad, and I think what seems normal and okay in our own heads clearly is not from the rest of the world outside. And so from what you've described, just your in my opinion, calling it exactly right. I mean, you have an organization that serves vulnerable women, and he was paying sex for one of them. That's just wrong on so many levels, and is a real problem. But I think it's also a classic example of how somebody who is caught up in their addiction doesn't see their behavior and how wrong it can be, or how it might be impacting other people. And I think that that lack of empathy is, I think, one of the kind of hallmarks of an active sex addict. And so I'm glad he's trying to work at getting sober. And you know, recovery is not a black and white thing. It's like a switch you turn on and now you're different. So it's a process of kind of unfolding and healing. And but I think this is definitely a blind spot if he still believes that at 6 months. That is a perfect classic example of this kind of skewed behavior that people get when they are in their addiction and they don't kind of see the implications. And so I understand what a tough action that was on your part to do that. It feels like the right one to me, but I think he has some work to do there. I don't question his, you know, desire to get to move forward in recovery, but that kind of stuff is a real a blind spot. You know, Seeking Integrity, we have our partners write impact letters that are shared with the guys either privately or in group, and it's very powerful. You know, I think, and that's one of the most effective tools I know to break through that that bubble that people have with that sort of lack of awareness. So maybe he can get some kind of exercise like that. I do believe someday it'll come crashing in on him what he did. Yeah, I think you're in exactly the right spot. Yeah, and I think, you know, I don't know that we can question his commitment to recovery, but I think that's a blind spot in his process that, you know, a therapist could work with him, or a sponsor, or somebody needs to really do a reality check with him on that.
Yeah, that was what I was thinking too. I was like, I wonder what his qualified therapist and his sponsor say about that, and what's in his inner circle. Yeah, so that feels like, oh, I'm in recovery, and you know, I'm not doing, but it doesn't feel like he's had a sounding board to go through. You know, here's my history, here's what I've done, and you know, I don't hear a fourth and fifth step, but you know, all of those things. So, so yes, I hope he stays with the recovery process and continues to dig in, because, you know, the longer you're on the journey, the more, you know, the more insights you get, and, you know, the more you're able to shift and go, oh, wait, that wasn't such a hot idea that you know, or that thinking was skewed, like you said.
And you know, this happens everywhere. The single biggest complaint against therapists are getting involved with clients sexually and emotionally, which you'd think, of course, they, you know, that's drilled into us from day one of graduate school, right? But it happens because people get into that mindset where they can't see it. And so, I mean, I understand how it happens, but it's a real distorted way of thinking that needs to be corrected. And usually the only way we can do that is the impact of you know, other people giving us that feedback.
Yes, but we have to be willing to tell people in the first place so that so we can do a check-in with them on that, you know. And so if I'm just doing it in my head, that's the scariest place for, you know, to figure out what I should do next. So,
right.
So we are out of time, but someone shared this, and I want to, in the chat, positive reframing is learning how to sit with uncomfortable feelings, learning how to accept the feelings will pass. And I thought that was a great way to just close as well. So Dr. David, thanks so much. It's been a joy to be with you tonight. I'm always happy to sub in and get to see you. And thanks for all the great questions, everybody. This was awesome. There's lots of resources on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. So keep coming back, and we're building more all the time. So.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.